Hi, my name is Ben Castro. Today we'll be talking about Chapter 14, Interviews and Follow-Ups. Now, an incredibly important part to any interview is being prepared. It's also important to remember that interviews are a two-way street. You are evaluating that company just as much as they are evaluating you. A great way to be prepared for any interview is to stay up to date on modern trends. A few of these trends include early screening with technology. This allows companies to weed out candidates who might not truly fit the bill that they need. Companies have also been lengthening out their hiring processes. Interviews are longer and there's more follow-up interviews so that they can better understand each person and see who fits the role the best. Companies have also been using on-the-spot interviews where when one candidate comes in with an application, they will often take them into an interview then. This has forced a lot of candidates to keep copies of their resumes and other references saved as PDFs on their phones. Companies have also been using psychometrics and skills tests to see how people evaluate and work in the environment with things that they say they have and where their strengths and weaknesses truly lie. Companies have also been using behavioral and situational questions. This allows them to see how candidates might act on the job with situations that might arise on the job. They've also been doing a lot of group interviewing, which allows candidates to show how they work in groups and who has the best communication styles and see who rises as leaders. The hiring process is incredibly linear. It begins everywhere with the application. From that point on, there's initial screenings, which help reduce the amount of candidates, followed by, if there's a large pool, secondary screenings to just wean the number down more. At that point, those who made it pass will be sent to proposals for a hiring manager to review. If you pass that, then you'll be brought in for hiring interviews. If you do well there, you might just get the job. Well, you might ask yourself, why do we still do interviews? Because there's a lot of technology, we can upload a lot about ourselves online and reduce the wasted time of meeting with people in person. But interviews give benefits to both sides. As a candidate, you can convince employers of your potential. You can only put so much about yourself on a piece of paper, and having the ability to cover that piece of paper and explain those topics with someone who might offer you a job is hugely important. It's also a great opportunity for the candidate to learn about the company they're applying to. There's somebody there that's whole job is to answer questions, and this allows them to ask their questions and have an audience without having to wait for emails or scour online. Again, this process allows candidates to cover their bases and explain the material on their resumes better so that there's no confusion and people understand what it is this person brings to the table. As an employer, interviews are great because it allows you to assess a candidate's abilities in relationship to the job. There might be people who've had similar jobs in the past, but this job is a little different and they might not fit exactly the way you need them to. This is a great opportunity to allow you to find that out before you hire them. It also allows the employer to discuss the candidate's resume, answer any questions that they might have, and find out more about the work that they did at these jobs they had. Employers can also see what motivates the candidates. It can see more on the personal level and see why these people get out of bed every morning and see if they'll be a great fit for the company culture, because that's an incredibly important part of having somebody in your workplace, is that they get along with people and they fit in the organization. Screening interviews are always what begin. Again, covered earlier, they eliminate those who don't fit the minimum requirements, and they're typically done at job fairs, on college campuses, or over the phone for people who've applied. They usually just go over the resumes of those who have applied and find out what it is and why they need this job. Then you move on to your hiring interviews. These are your big interviews. They're done in multiple different ways. Most commonly is done on one-to-one interviews. This is where you sit down with a company rep and you discuss, answer questions. They ask you questions, you ask them questions. These are typically done with either a hiring manager who will ask you more specific questions on the job at hand, or an HR representative who will give you more general questions about your candidacy and why you should be hired. Another great way of interviews are panel interviews. This is typically done when one person meets with a panel or group of other people from the company. This allows them to evaluate them from different perspectives, get different people's point of views, and kind of changes the interview style. This also allows the people who are being interviewed to do research and kind of figure out more about who's interviewing them, and then they can come into that better prepared and knowing who they're going to be dealing with. It's a great way to see these people who might be your superiors and evaluate them yourself, so you know you're not getting into work with a bad boss. Another style is group interviews, as we discussed earlier. These are great for candidates who are able to show their communication skills and their leadership skills, as it allows them to better showcase them in a group of peers. And these are typically done with one or multiple interviewers, but with multiple candidates at the same time. Another style of interview is our sequential interviews. These are great because they allow for candidates to meet with different people of different roles at the company that they're interviewing at, and to find out more details about those different roles, like people who you might be co-workers with, people who might be above you, people who might be in different departments, and find out how the company ticks. These are typically done over several hours or even days, and you need to keep in mind when you're doing these types of interviews that the people probably don't communicate. And even if they do, just keep in mind that they don't. You need to answer every question, even if it's a repeat from somebody else, as crisp and as accurate and as energetic as you did the first time, to make sure that you leave that best impression. Finally, there's video interviews. There's two main types of video interviews. The first type is one way, and these are done where the company will send you questions and you record yourself like this, answering those questions, and then you submit those videos back to the company. Or you can have a two-way interview. Those are typically done where you have a FaceTime or a Skype or whatever video call or phone call service the company chooses, and you have a typical one-to-one interview that way online. Those are great for people who are interviewing for jobs in different states or different countries even. And yeah, so finally I'll hand it off to Jeff with...
All right. Before the interview, there are a lot of things you can do to help yourself get a job. All right. So before the interview, you want to know that when you send out a job resume, it makes you a job seeker. And oftentimes employers can use screening interviews to narrow down candidates. So once you send resumes out, it's important to know that there are these screening interviews, and they're very important because if you don't pass a screening interview, they automatically look past you. All right. So once you send out these interviews, be prepared to be contacted by potential employers that you have reached out to, for these screening interviews. All right. Ensuring professional phone techniques. So phone techniques are very important because it can really depict an image of you to your employers. So when employers call you, you want to make sure that you have a professional voicemail. This helps your image tremendously. All right. A really good thing to use this with is if you're somewhere where you cannot answer the phone, it is all right because you have your voicemail. You can call them back. If you're in a place where you wouldn't be able to carry on a conversation, it's actually best to not answer the phone so that you can call them back later. All right. All right. So the first impression. This is a very important thing, obviously. Everyone knows first impressions are extremely important. So what you want to do is, if you've applied to a lot of jobs, sometimes you can forget some. So what you want to do is you want to keep a list close to you at all times, close to your phone. So if an employer calls you and you honestly forget that you ever applied there, you have a list like, oh yeah, I do remember this, and I remember this was his name, and this is what I need to know about it. So it keeps you in the loop, and so it can keep you from getting caught off guard. If you get caught off guard, it's best to ask to call back at a better time in order to save that first impression. Another good thing you want to do during phone interviews is take a lot of notes. Taking notes is a really good thing during all conversations and interviews because it helps you retain all the information that you'll need. All right, so cleaning up digital dirt. This is basically just cleaning up your social media, make yourself look presentable. What does your social media say about you? All right, so this could be as simple as, going through and maybe deleting a questionable picture, maybe this person shouldn't be following you, or maybe you shouldn't follow this person. So big things are, you want to be selective about who's following you, who you're following, and always stay positive on all your social media to depict to your employer a good image. All right, fighting fear. So practicing an interview, you can do mock interviews with friends. I found this to be very useful if you're scared or, so if you're scared, you're just nervous because maybe it's your first big interview, it's a big job, it's your dream job. Just sit down with with a buddy and you can go over it and it helps calm the nerves when you actually get in that situation and when you're more rehearsed. Another big thing is prepare thoroughly. You should probably have a lot of questions prepared and have a lot of answers prepared to a lot of common questions that they ask. Another big one is deep breaths. This is a very popular one because it works. So if you're ever nervous during an interview, you just take deep breaths, or before an interview, or any stressful situation really that you can find yourself in. Deep breaths really help calm yourself down.
Hi, I'm Drew Barman, and I'm talking about during the interview. So the three things you want to kind of focus on during your interview is to have good body language and nonverbal cues, to prepare questions ahead of time, and like your main goal when it comes to the interview is to learn about the company while the interviewer is trying to learn about you. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is like act professionally during your interview. So you want to control your body movements. You can still like use your hand gestures, but you want to keep like your arms mainly down to your sides. Like don't cross your legs, don't cross your arms, don't like give a bad signal to the person talking to you. Have good gestures, good posture, sit up straight. Then you also want to have good eye contact and smile a lot to the interviewer to kind of show that you're like following what they're saying, like listening to all their questions and like trying to answer enthusiastically and be an active listener. Also want to turn off your electronics and don't chew gum, because these can only be distractions during your interview. You want to give your full focus to the interview, the process, and be confident but not overly confident where it comes off as cocky. Like be confident in stuff that you do, but don't just start bragging about yourself mid-interview. Okay, so now answering the interview questions, there's some certain things you want to do. First, you want to avoid answering questions with just a simple yes or no. Like this is just, you want to elaborate a little bit more, go like deep into the question to show that you're giving some thought into what they're asking you. And don't be afraid to have them clarify some vague questions, like say, what do you mean by this? To kind of make sure you're answering the question fully and like answering what they want to know. Also, answer questions with characteristics that the interviewers want to see. So before your interview, you want to do some research on it and then answer with the characteristics that they're looking to find to help you better fit the job description that they're looking for. And avoid slang words and enunciate clearly during this, that way they can understand you. And always tell the truth, because if like say like you lie on something simple, you're trying to bump your GPA up to look better for an interview, then they can easily check that, and if you're lying, that really hurts your credibility when it comes to getting the job. And also avoid controversial topics, just keep it mainly focused on the interview itself. You don't want to offend somebody and hurt your chances. Now, there's a lot of types of questions to prepare for. Instead of just listing a ton of examples, I just gave the main topics the book has, and I'm just going to try and like say a few examples instead of covering this entire PowerPoint. So, questions to get acquainted. These are like your starter questions, like tell me about yourself and what are your strengths. Just your basic like starting questions. Questions to gauge your interest about the company. This is kind of like, why are you interested in this position? Why work for this company? Those are some questions you really need to be prepared for. Questions about experience and accomplishments. This is where they would kind of ask you like, what accomplishments did you have in your past job, experiences from like education experiences or like what you achieved. Questions about the future, your like 5 to 10 year plan. Challenging questions. So these are like difficult ones, like they might ask you what you want your salary to be. Now this one, the book said you can usually try and deflect and be like, we'll talk about that later when there's like a job offer, to kind of like wait on that so you can figure out more like the salary that people have in this position. Or like your weaknesses, and these you always want to kind of spin around and make almost be a little bit of a positive for yourself. Then there's also situational questions, which could be like somebody rejects like a proposal you've given, like what is your reaction, what like in a certain situation. Now there's also behavioral questions, which is kind of similar to the situation, but for this you want to kind of use a recent example. So they might ask you like, tell me a time you solved a difficult problem. So you want to use like something recently, like in a recent job or like something at school, and you want to follow the STAR technique, which is you say the situation you were in, you say what the task was, then you say the action you took to complete the task, followed by the results of the situation. Now towards the end of the interview, there comes a point where you can ask your own questions. So usually you always want to have at least one question. You never want to just say no when they say any questions. It really looks bad, like you weren't listening or you're not interested. And then you always, this is like your biggest chance to learn about the company. So some like sample questions I put down are like, what is the work environment here, and is travel required in this position? Like just some simple questions to kind of help you learn about the company or learn about the position you're going to take. So now, to end the interview, you want to end positively. So you can ask how you can follow up or when you'll hear back from them about the interview. And make sure you're polite and professional as you're leaving, and you thank them for the opportunity and show enthusiasm about working with you or working with them or getting the job. And that's all I have for my section. Now on to Brady.
Hi, I'm Brady Murphy, and I'm here to talk to you about what you should do after an interview. First thing you want to do is send a thank you message. Sending a thank you message sets you apart from other applicants applying for the same job. This also shows you have good manners and a good sense of professionalism. The 3 ways you could send a thank you message would be a note card, a typed letter, or an email. Although many people like to send emails, I personally prefer to send a note card. This way, your employer can have that piece of paper in their hand and shows you really care about the job you interviewed for. The last thing to remember about sending a thank you message would be to thank each person that interviewed you. For example, if a person offered you encouragement or confidence or gave you positive feedback during the interview, you want to thank them specifically for that and shows you remembered every step of the interview process. The next thing you want to do is be sure to follow up. This includes contacting your references. The last thing you want for it to happen is your employer contacts a reference and they're caught off guard and are not able to answer questions about you on the spot. You want to give them time to prepare and think about what they're going to say when called upon. When following up to the company that interviewed, you want to give up to 5 business days. Email is best because a phone call can be too aggressive. So and be respectful and don't force a decision. And lastly, I want to talk about employee documents. First, we have an application form. An application form just gives background to companies about your previous work experiences that might not be included on your resume or things you're interested in. Be sure to read it over first and write legibly so it's not hard to read. A great way to prepare for an application form is to keep a note card of all commonly used questions, you can just copy them down real quick. Next, we have a rejection follow-up message. If you're rejected from a job, don't take it to heart fully. See why you're rejected and see what you can improve on so you can do better in the future and not give up on your dreams right away. Last, we have a job acceptance or rejection message. When accepting or rejecting a job, it's always important to remain professional in acceptance or rejection. Finally, we have a conclusion. Just to reiterate, me and my group members today talked about types of interviews, professionalism, questions in an interview, and following up an interview. Thank you for watching.